Well, good morning or afternoon, depending on where you're located. We're so excited to have you with us today, as well as our panelists, Crystal Green Braswell, Don Porter, and Kelly Bergman. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. Today's webinar is going to be recorded, and so you'll receive a link to the recording after today, probably by the end of the week, and any other resources that were shared during the webinar, whether it be in the chat or in the Q&A, all of those links will be provided to you in an email as well. All questions, it's just a little bit more efficient if you want to go ahead and put your questions in the Q&A versus the chat. And so hopefully you have access to that. And we have Kat, who is with us today, who's going to be from Mindprint Learning, who's going to be monitoring the chat as well as the Q&A. The presentation is going to be about an hour, or I should say rather roundtable discussion, and that's going to include time for the audience to ask live questions. Some questions could be answered during the webinar today if they're just really quick responses and resources that you need, but we are going to hold some questions until the end. So if you do put a question in the Q&A and it's not answered immediately, it's because we're going to go ahead and hold that for the benefit of the rest of the audience. All right. So for today's agenda, I'm going to go ahead and introduce the panelists, and then we're going to have Vicki Algieri give us a brief overview of the science of learning within the framework of MTSS, and then we'll dig into our roundtable discussion today. So we're so excited to have you with us, as well as our panelists. Crystal, who's here with us, is a leadership development coach in the state of Arkansas. She's also an author, former principal, and academic achievement specialist. Don, who is also with us today, is an assistant principal and student achievement and intervention specialist at Cloverdale Middle School in Arkansas and Little Rock, and has been named the principal of Dr. Marianne G. Lacey K-8 Academy. So congratulations, Don, in your most recent appointment. And then we have Kelly, who's an award-winning 6th grade ELA teacher at Ridley Middle School in Pennsylvania. And so you all are in for a real treat today to hear their perspective on how an objective strengths-based approach can lead to increased student achievement. Today's webinar is a continuation of the Science of Learning series that we've been hosting over the last several months. And it's going to provide you a unique lens in understanding the whole child within an MTSS framework. I mean, perhaps you're here because this topic intrigued you, or maybe it's something that you wanted to learn more about, the how and the why behind student learning. This is the time in education where we're asking a lot of questions, and we're trying to understand how we can move the dial quickly in student achievement and yet provide a really rich learning experience for each and every student. Diving into the science of learning is probably the best place to start with this, especially within the framework of MTSS and meeting every child's learning needs. And so I think with that, let's go ahead and start with our Director of Learning, Senior Director of Learning, Vicki Algieri, Mindprint Learning. Go ahead and take it from here, Vicki.
Okay. Thank you, Melissa, and thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm going to be giving a little background into our data-driven approach before we jump into discussion with our panelists. So Melissa, you can advance to the slide with quotes. When we talk about MTSS, although different schools have varying structures in place, generally we're all talking about a framework to meet students' academic and behavioral needs, and to ensure structures are in place to support students who are underperforming academically or exhibiting challenging behaviors. So before we get into the meat of the presentation, let's start out with these two quotes. I'm going to let you take a moment to read and reflect. So in short, when a student in our class is acting out or avoiding tasks, this is so often really a coping mechanism. The struggle is exhibiting as a behavior when often the root cause is a difficulty learning or self-managing in a school setting. And the student may feel embarrassed or overwhelmed or doesn't know how to ask for help. And it's coming through in these behaviors. And as educators, the go-to often is to define the problem as the behavior or a lack of motivation. And it's hard to view it as something that can be fixed or supported within the classroom. So students end up getting referred to tier 2 or out for testing, when in so many cases with a more complete picture to understand the root cause of the problem, we can actually help a student overcome these blockers within the classroom. Melissa will go to the next slide, please. So this leads us to what we'll be talking about today. If teachers have whole child data, we believe most students really can get the needed supports in the general classroom or move more fluidly to tier 2 and out of tier 2 with a little help. So to help you visualize how we believe the most effective data triangulation can help inform MTSS, let's look at what data we mean first. So you have your academic data, and as educators, you probably have most of the academic data you need, maybe too much. You know where your students are meeting academic benchmarks and where they're not, and what they need to master next. Then you have your SEL data. Most of you are probably collecting some type of SEL data at this point. And you also, most importantly, have your educator superpowers of observation and knowing your students best. What engages them, what motivates them, how they work in a group, right? But the third set, what you probably don't have yet for your tier 1 and tier 2 students, what is often the missing puzzle piece is that cognitive data to understand how your students learn. What are their learning strengths and best approaches to reach them? And what might be blocking them from efficient learning? This cognitive data really enables you to peel back the why of a challenge and how to help. So this is the data our panelists have used to inform their whole child MTSS approach that you'll be hearing about. Without going into a lot of detail today, when we say cognitive data, it's these skills up here that you see that you'll be hearing about in the discussion. We've covered these skills in a lot more depth in our previous bunch of webinars. So for more detail on these, please visit the webinars on our YouTube channel to look at hear about our learning pyramid in a lot more depth. But in short, we're looking at the skills in the following domains. So in executive functioning, think about it's a student's readiness to learn. Like, how do they plan? How do they organize? How do they initiate and follow through on work? How are they self-managing? And we have the skills of attention, working memory, and flexible thinking there. Then there's the complex reasoning domain. How is the student understanding? And there are different modalities to understanding. You have your verbal, and then your visual, abstract, and visual spatial reasoning. And then we have our memory. How are the students remembering? We have how are they remembering with the words and visual with pictures. And then lastly, we have our domain of efficiency or processing speed. And so that's really all about how quickly or slowly a student is taking in information and able to respond to it. So those are the skills that we're going to be referring to when we talk about this cognitive data. And lastly, what does this all look like when you put it together and incorporate the cognitive data into an MTSS framework at all tiers? So at a tier level, think about it as the data provides the roadmap for reaching students through efficient differentiation. So it helps you address notable trends in the classroom based on how your students learn best. So you can use general teaching approaches based on class or small group strengths and needs. For example, you may have stronger visual learners in your class, and you'll use more pictures and images to help them understand. Or you have more spatial learners, so hands-on projects are the way to go. Or a big post-pandemic trend that we've seen is a high need to support memory across the board. And with that, spaced repetition is key. So this cognitive data at a tier 1 level informs the strategies that will reach groups of learners within the classroom. And Melissa, you can maybe press twice, I think. And moving up to a tier 2 level, this data can give an in-depth understanding of why an individual student at this level isn't meeting those academic benchmarks, or why the student is having challenges managing their work. So you can plan and use specific approaches to that student to help them master content and self-manage with less frustration and more confidence going into the classroom. And then lastly, at a tier 3 level, the cognitive screening gives the data to allow for goal setting and intervention to happen right away. And when and if a student needs further testing, it can reduce testing time as well. And then with the goal of providing targeted practical strategies to meet goals. So that kind of gives a brief overview of how this data informs schools' MTSS practice. And I'll turn it back to Melissa to introduce our wonderful partners.
Yeah, so I'm sure there's several audience members that are already thinking, and we haven't even gotten into the panel discussion yet about the practicality of using this data in and day out of teaching and making decisions at a school level and district and a state level. But there is an opportunity that if you are interested in knowing how to obtain this kind of data on each and every student, you can access it through Mindprint Learning. And so Dr. Jennifer Stillman is with us today. You may have seen her pop in at the very beginning. Jennifer, thank you. She's going to go ahead and put her camera back on. But Jennifer is the director of research for the Learner Variability Project at Digital Promise. And there's a phenomenal opportunity that we have that's funded by the Walton Foundation. And Jennifer, you can talk a little bit more about that. So this is sort of a break in the panel just to give you guys an opportunity as audience members to learn about this special grant opportunity. And then we'll proceed with the panel discussion.
Thanks, Melissa. Yeah, my internet connection seems a bit unstable, so hopefully you can hear me. I'm walking around the house trying to find a place where it works. But as Melissa said, I work for the Learner Variability Project at Digital Promise, and we are partnering with Mindprint Learning to study the power of alternative assessments. And this work is being funded by the Walton Family Foundation, which has generously given us the opportunity to offer Mindprint Learning for free to a school or district in exchange for participating in our research. So what we would ask for schools or districts that are interested is to have a minimum of 5 teachers and 150 students who could participate in this research study. The time commitment, in addition to doing your Mindprint onboarding and testing, is just a pre-post survey research implementation. So it's just survey data, which usually takes about 5 to 10 minutes pre-post to collect that information from teachers and students. But we are very interested in better understanding how Mindprint can help support teachers and students kind of grow their sense of efficacy, that they can make a difference in their own learning. So if anyone is interested in exploring this opportunity, my contact information is on this slide. It's Jennifer Stillman, jstillman@digitalpromise.org. And then my phone number is there as well. So please feel free to contact me if you're interested.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Stillman. I appreciate it. So I feel like there was like just a brief commercial there in between this panel discussion that we're about to dive into. So great opportunity, and so thankful for the Walton Family Foundation as well as Digital Promise for their partnership. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dig into our panel discussion today. Again, audience members, if you have any questions as we're going throughout, specifically for one of our panel members or for all of our panel members, please put those in the Q&A. We will be answering them live in session, but then we also might hold some of those questions to the end for the benefit of everybody hearing the answer from our panelists today. So Vicki, thank you for the great overview of how to use a proactive strengths-based approach at each tier. I think that's really helpful to sort of set the foundation and the lens for the discussion that's going to happen today. Crystal, let's go ahead and start with you. I mean, what was the biggest gap in your MTSS solution that Mindprint filled for you?
So really, Vicki's presentation kind of stole my thunder. But what happened at our school is that we were almost stuck in a rut with our academic data and our SEL data, because it told us, it just kept, in a sense, kept telling us what our students couldn't do, right? Like we were just almost stagnant for just a minute. And when Mindprint came into the equation, what it allowed for us to understand is what our students were really capable of. And so those complex reasoning skills were there. But because of the learning blocks that were happening as far as the executive functions, like it gave us an opportunity to decide what we needed, what skills we needed to build versus being beat down by the academic and the SEL data. And so really it freed us. It freed us from what we had been bogged down with for so long.
Mm-hmm. Kelly or Dawn, do you want to provide, a teacher or principal perspective on, practically speaking, how have you been using the data and reporting to decide, who gets additional support, who gets additional enrichment, who maybe needs to be referred for further testing, or kind of move up the scale of the framework?
So I'll just back up just a minute and let you know
Okay.
that we started this year with having our 6th, 7th, and 8th graders tested. So it was a school-wide initiative.
Okay.
As a 6th grade teacher, I teach the gifted end of things. And it was the first time that I actually saw data that I thought could, like, these are our gifted kids. What more are you going to do with them? And the data that came in was not only telling me what they could do, but I could do as well when I looked at their MindPrint data. For instance, like a student who maybe takes forever to take a test and you think he's doing it on purpose to slow the clock down, and I would get the MindPrint data and it would say, this kid pretty much is going to have trouble taking a test. It's going to take him a long time. He needs more time on task. So just things like that it kind of helped me to change a little bit, like the way I approach the students. That was the first change. And then I think I'll answer in later questions how I've seen some individual students and the change that they've made as well.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like there was a bit of a shift of perception from your point of view, but maybe also insight, some self-awareness for the student as well. Like, this is pretty normal for my brain, that it's going to take me a little bit longer to do this test, and that's okay.
Right.
Yeah. Dawn?
And if I could just jump in there, and I think these two ladies did a wonderful job of kind of bringing that right home for me. And I love how in your question you mentioned about the strengths-based approach and how the data that was available with MindPrint was unlike other things in that it was more than just a data point, but it really painted the entire picture. It didn't just talk about the what, but kind of the why behind the what, and then the how to address that what. And so it gave us a kind of an avenue to plan an attack or to plan an approach to support all learners, both our high achieving learners, but also those that struggle. And I really, for me in my role, the first time we introduced MindPrint to the students and we were looking at our data with students, there were a lot of students who were, I don't want to say underserved, but maybe on the lower end of things. I know Kelly mentioned about, having those gifted learners, but a lot of students who, are classified under, IDEA and things of that nature, but being able to say, hey, you're more than just a number, or you're more than just a this, that, or, behind or lagging or something. And it showed that even students that are classified as in need of support, for instance, they also have strengths. And so let's look at these strengths and let's also celebrate the strengths that you have. And these are some practical things that we can do to build capacity in these other areas. So it really, Crystal often uses this term about rehumanizing the profession, which she's talking about even with the adults. But I think as our approach with the students, it rehumanized what we do with students and not just doing something at them. And then we had the evidence to back that up. So that was one of the things for me that I really loved and kind of was a game changer for me in my role.
It kind of leads into our next question in terms of, changes that you've seen in students' academic performance or their behavior as a result of having access to this data. Maybe you could elaborate a little bit more on that, about, maybe a particular student story or a whole class change that you observed. I see a comment in the chat that, this is really a strengths-based approach, and that, so far we've talked about deficits, but I think we have talked about the strengths, and that, to your point, Dawn, what I hear repetitively is, here's a student with an IEP who has felt unsuccessful in school, and the mind print is saying you have incredible flexible thinking. Your abstract reasoning is exceptional. And so for the first time in their life, they're hearing, I have a strength in something, and this is how I can leverage that. So could you talk a little
Yeah.
bit about how maybe some of those insights into the strengths and then the strategies that are matched to that
Mm.
enhance that student perception of growth mindset or whatever it is that you've seen a change in?
I love that. And that was a perfect segue even for me. And I want to talk about one young man by the name of Corey. His 6th grade year, we did the mind print assessment. And prior to the assessment, this was just in the first maybe month or two of school, a lot of behavior, disciplinary issues. He was diagnosed with some other things. And so he never saw himself as successful. I was just pulling him in. It was for another reason. But he was in my office and I was like, hey, let's look at your mind print data. Like what, I want to know how I can help you. And I pulled it up and I was really surprised. And I know that sounds horrible to say. But I was really expecting him to have I was expecting him to score a lot more in the low category on a lot of areas. And actually, if I remember correctly, I think the visual motor speed and his working memory were much higher than average. And everything else, like his flexible thinking, his abstract reasoning were in the medium category. He only had like one thing in the low area. I was like, man, Corey, do you see this? Like this? And he's like, what does all that mean? I took the test, but I don't know. The test was crazy. And so we sat and I just pulled up his profile and we literally went through and I was like, so man, these are the kinds of things you can do. He's like, well, I like doing this and I like doing this. And this is why I don't like reading sometimes because, and him sitting there literally in my office in a matter of, probably a 30-minute conversation, making these kind of connections, it really reinvigorated me. And so what I did after that moment, as kids would come in my office, I really would say, hey, let's look at mind print. Like, what am I missing about, how can I better support you? And so beginning those conversations with strengths, I'm proud to say, and Crystal was here on our campus when we did this, Corey was one of the first groups of students. We actually created a program. We kind of, because of the abundance of data, when you pull up the mind print, there's that the student dashboard that kind of shows all the students. And there were some trends that I was seeing among some of our frequent flyers and things. It's like, hey, why don't we think about how we're doing class a little differently? And we created what we call a Mad Lab, kind of a piece of a makerspace, a piece of a kind of independent study. Kids had a little free time and flexibility, and they were able to really bring their strengths to the learning moment. And they still were responsible for some things and tasks, but we made learning work for them, and they were kind of put in charge of that. And our principal and we had some teachers that were just really excited about it and got behind it, and it really revolutionized how they saw students, one, but also how they saw themselves as scholars, not just students who, we did school at them. And so their attendance increased, their participation and even extracurricular activities increased, just because this one little piece of data that showed or described them more than just a number or more than just a designation, but it really painted a more complete picture. And they saw themselves, specifically Corey, in a way that he had never described himself before. And he's one of our top 8th graders in terms of his academic engagement.
And is that sort of enlightenment, if you will, is it contagious? Like, have you seen whole class changes, shifts?
Yes.
Like, can you
Yes.
talk maybe a little bit about that, Crystal, Kelly, whoever wants to
I'd
chime
love to
in?
jump in here. So what we did at Ridley is language arts teachers presented them with their mind print data. So every student was able to access the student profile, and we kind of told them how to read it. And I think it might have been the first time like you said, Don, some kids realized, oh my gosh, I'm good at things. You can clearly see the strengths they have. Once we did that, the conversations we started hearing students have, like I had a boy named Christian, and he'd say, I'm going to draw a picture of this vocabulary word because my mind print data tells me that I learn better if I draw pictures. Like just those kind of conversations happening. And because the whole 6th grade was introduced sort of at the same time with it, you actually heard kids talking. So we kind of tried to put it in their hands as a tool that they can use personally. And then again, you're still going to have those kids that they don't buy into it. They don't look at it. They don't care too much. And that's where we try to meet them a little bit more one-on-one or with guidance counselors, or unfortunately, kids who get in trouble, you tend to take a closer look at them to say, what can we do for this kid?
Mhm. What else is going on here? I think it's what Vicky
Yep.
kind of highlighted at the beginning, right? Like behavior is a symptom. And so what additional insights can we look at besides just traditional SEL and academic data? You know, is this the missing piece that really creates that whole child perspective? Crystal, were you going to chime in? Did I see your? No, you're good. Okay.
No,
Don,
I think
anything
they-
else?
I think
Right.
they covered it.
Okay.
I just wanted to also, Crystal, you know, another thing that we did, Kelly, you said something that really reminded me. We also instituted school-wide because we did it with our 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. So when we were pulling the data and we realized, like you mentioned, Kelly, a lot of times it's easier for us in our seats of influence to, you know, give attention to certain groups, right? And we're like, hey, everybody needs to be a part of this. And we really want to put it back in the hands of the students. And so we kind of revamped a district course offering elective course that we had, and we created a Cloverdale version of our college and career readiness. And it's a course that all of our students take, and a part of that course, they take the Mindprint assessment. They have a module where they're going through their data. What does this mean? How can I set goals? How can I be a more independent, autonomous learner? And we have students that come back to teachers and saying, hey, you know, I want to do this project because, you know, this is my strength in Mindprint, or I need to focus on this, or I need to write it down because this is an area that I'm building capacity in. And you know, attaching that to that growth mindset, it really does empower the students to be, you know, kind of autonomous and self-advocates.
Yes.
One thing that was really exciting for me as well.
Don, you made me think about that young man who was in a resource class, and he, after taking his Mindprint and being exposed in that particular class you were talking about, used his Mindprint to advocate to be moved to an advanced class in math versus the resource class. He was like, no. I need, based on my Mindprint, I actually need to be here, and I'm going to hold you all accountable for that.
Right.
So
Wow.
I do remember that. Absolutely.
And that's the goal, right? Like to own their education, to own their learning. So we've been talking a lot about student empowerment, student awareness, student shifts. I'd like to go a little bit on the other end from like a teacher's perspective. So, you know, Crystal, we know that MTSS is a very student-centered, strengths-based approach, but can you talk a little bit about how you've seen teachers changing as a result of having access to this data? And obviously, Kelly, we'll want you to chime in here at some point too, as a teacher yourself. General classroom teachers, maybe resource tier 2, or even special ed teachers. Maybe you can talk about all three of those dynamics.
Absolutely. I first have to confess that I changed as a provider of adult learning, as a professional development person in my building. Like, our adults were given this Mindprint assessment. We didn't require that they share their results with us. However, they did. And so when they did, it helped me to look at them in different ways, and helped me to help them as far as where their strengths were, and then how to empathize with students that had different Mindprint profiles than they did. And so it helped me to address that adult learning in different ways based on what my learners needed. So I will say I had to bring myself to the altar and say it changed me. And so with those teachers, though, what we saw is that teachers began to provide opportunities for students to feel success, because they were giving them opportunities to engage in the learning that aligned with their strengths, so that those students often would feel that success. But then also we saw, and Don mentioned it earlier, where folks were just, the conversations were different. It was, well, what does the Mindprint say? Well, what did we need to do based on the Mindprint? Or collaborations, when you pop into a team meeting where, you know, they're talking about how to best fulfill needs. It was, okay, let's look at the Mindprint and let's make a plan based on it. right? And so even in those tier 2 and those IDEA meetings, all of those meetings involved a Mindprint assessment report. Like it was a no-brainer. And the conversation was around what it said and how we need to, because, you know, we can talk about those learning blocks, but even our approach to the learning block, it's not a deficit. It's just a place where we can build skills. And so even the way that we looked at it, yes, we're going to address it because that's what we're supposed to do. However, we're going to let those students know, as Dawn and both Kelly talked about before, baby, you actually have a bunch of strengths. And at the end of the day, we're going to make sure that you understand what they are, and you're going to know your data so much that you can use it to advocate for yourself. But we are also going to make sure that those learning blocks are no longer learning blocks for you. And we're going to help you to build those skills. So with that being said, the conversations just shifted and changed. And so our mindsets and our hearts shifted and changed for the better.
So I took the Mindprint test. That was the beautiful thing that happened when they first came to us. We all got to take it. And at first it was like you said, Don, it was all this crazy testing. I'm thinking, what am I doing with these shapes and these things? And you could tell when I was taking it, I could tell, man, I'm really bad at this thing, whatever this is I'm doing. But when I got my own personal data, I was like, I understood myself so much better. Like, just like I see the kids light up, I kind of lit up and said, yeah, that's me. That's exactly me. So that was me as a teacher, like this, you know, revelatory moment where I was like, wow, this is cool. But, you know, we always have teachers, and I've probably been one of them with some program here or there that's come through that you're like, oh no, not one more thing. And I've talked to a couple people just in the last couple of weeks, and we have this class we call IE, and it's supposed to help them with their state testing. And Mindprint, once they got the data, the teachers got the data, we reconfigured our IE classes, and they became the Math Boost program for some of the IE classes that they saw there was a need for. So we went from just addressing individual kids with Mindprint to being able to service a group of kids in a classroom where all they're doing is supporting their math, where they saw there was deficits. And the teachers that are running these programs, I'm not one of them, but I talked to them and they said they can't believe how seamless it is to bring it into they were all thinking it's going to be more work. We're going to have to plan and prep. And the way Mindprint has it set up, like I said, I don't know exactly what that looks like for them, but I just know they say it's a piece of cake and they can see the kids' growth as they're doing it, which for any teacher, if you can see the kids growing, that just makes your heart warm. So it's been good that way as well.
Well, teachers have the best hearts, right? I mean, you guys get into this business because you want to see a child go to a teen, to an adult, to thrive and to love learning as much as you do. And so anything that we can do to shift that mindset in a student, or even to shift the mindset in a teacher to go, I can do this. Like, I can still do this. You know, I still got it. And here's a fresh perspective of how I can help these students achieve their own success. So that's really helpful to hear, Kelly. Crystal and Dawn, you're both administrators, and can you talk a little bit about how this informs instructional decisions that you make for, tier 1 and tier 2? Have you done anything differently as a result in terms of resource allocation, or how you're designing, the classes? I think you mentioned it a little bit about how you created a new course, right, Dawn? And Kelly, you mentioned that as well as far as these math groups. So could either one of you expand a little bit more on that?
Dawn, I'll allow you to go first. I yield to Dawn.
I'm sorry. Yes, we, like I said, one of the most visible things that we did is kind of revamp our college and career readiness course. That's for all of our students. We find value in the amount of information that we're able to glean about our students, and that the students are able to see about themselves, but not just information for the sake of information. I think as educators, there's an overabundance of information out there, but what do we do with it? And so it really helped us, as Crystal also mentioned, not just in revamping the course, but the way we do our MTSS. And when we're looking at our tiered support, if we're looking at, if it's an IEP conference, or if students are not performing as expected, all of our conversations are about, well, where are these children strong at, and how can we build capacity? How can we develop in other areas? And bringing all of that information into part of the conversation. And so that's kind of more of our tier one in my mind. We carve out time to make sure that all of our students are able to be tested. We have, you mentioned resource allocation, in our master schedule, we know that we want every kid to take this course where they can have time to understand more about themselves, because we think it helps them better academically, but also socially. And so we don't find it as a waste of time. It's something that we're going to protect and do. When I think of tier two, I think about those students that we do see, and for me, it is easiest to talk about tier two in terms of behavior. So when we look at our, well, actually, as we were developing our matrix of our common behaviors and our expectations and things of that nature, we looked at I think it's called the student dashboard. I think that's the name. It's the one with all the colors. But on that, where you're able to easily see trends of strengths and kind of some areas of support. And we looked at, as a building, executive functioning was an area of concern for us. So a lot of the things that we wanted to focus on involved developing capacity around those areas. And so when we did our matrix, we understood that we couldn't just put it up, but we need to work on memory. And so repetition is key. We wanted to make it visual. We wanted to make sure we had pictures and, meeting the kids where they are. And so as students they do continue to experience difficulty, really pulling them in. And I think Kelly mentioned about kind of the course that they do, but looking at how with our counselors and with even our administrative staff, doing our small groups based on that data. And so not that the content of those groups change, but the delivery of these groups. So if our groups, if we have, maybe 10 students that are struggling with memory, the approach with them is a little different. If it's just their attention, the approach with that group is different. Again, they're still getting the same type of support, but how that support looks for those students is what we do to kind of differentiate and meet the needs of those learners.
Okay.
So that was kind of a very rudimentary area.
That was great. That was great. I don't know if Crystal wants to add anything with that. I've got another question for her real quick before we wrap up, because I want to make sure we have enough time.
Yeah, I think you did a great job, Dawn. I'm gonna let you do your thing.
So Crystal, I know you're at the state administrative level and working with lots of schools across the state of Arkansas. Can you share how you could see this data being used more generally to support schools or school districts?
Yes, one thing that we were able to do, it kind of answers both the previous question and this one.
Okay.
But if districts would allow for schools to have the autonomy to do what needs to be done for their population versus the one size fits all approach, because we were able to deviate from some district directed type programming because of our MindPrint data. And I think it would be important for not only state leaders, but school district leaders to give those school-based leaders the autonomy to be able to move away from something that could feel like a one size fits all approach. I think that the MindPrint actually gave us the data we needed to choose our interventions very efficiently and effectively, so that I think it's important that those leaders understand that there are some needs that are there, and it's important to give folks the right tools in order to make the sound decisions that they need to. And then also, when you get ready to place people on teams or assign people tasks or roles, just taking a look at their MindPrint data and saying, okay, wait a minute, this is your strength. I want you here so that you can move about this task effortlessly. versus struggling with it. And so even using the data and that could be applied to adults or kids. And so I think it's just important for us to take this data and allow for folks to do what they really need to do with it so that we can make the difference that needs to be made.
Okay, thank you for that. One final question that we have, and then we're going to dive into what our audience members are asking is, Kelly and Dawn and Crystal, if you have any insights on this too, since this is our final question, please chime in. But how have you used this cognitive data? How that explains how a student learns best? How are you using that as a family engagement tool or a communication tool at your schools? Or Dawn, how are your teachers, using that, or how are you encouraging teachers to do that?
Yeah, well, one of the things that we're working to build capacity on this year, and it's something that we noticed earlier in this academic year, really making our recognition more meaningful. So, attaching it as they are building capacity in deficit areas, really like attaching it to their own goals around, because our students set goals through their college and career readiness course. And so as they see themselves growing and building capacity, involving the parents in that conversation. And also when you get that the profile back, it specifies some things that you can do both at home and also at school to just help the student in these deficit areas, but also things you can do to extend strengths. And so when we have conversations at an administrative level with parents and families, it's kind of it's an undergird of trust and support, saying, hey, this is why we do what we do. So this is a reason to trust us, with your child. Your child is in good hands. We want them to be a very well-rounded, capable individual. And this is why we do what we do. And a parent, even if it's, maybe not the best call initially, when we're able to say, but this is why we're on your child, because these are strengths. And we know that they're capable in this area. So we're really working and focusing in on this. And so this is how we can help one another, because we really want the same thing. I mean, that just changes the name of the game. And then parents are more authentically engaged. And it's not just pulling teeth because, we've got some random, pop can ceremony or something we just want you to come to. It's really something meaningful that's designed to support your child and make sure they're their best selves. So yeah, anybody else? Kelly,
Kelly, you want to?
For me, it's, when you have a parent-teacher conference, we haven't quite been given the go-ahead to just share the Mindprint data outright with parents at this point. It is new to us this year. They're still looking at, what it all means in the big scheme of the district and their goals. But as a teacher, when a kid does not have an IEP or a GIP, which is, I don't know if that means anything to you in your states, but if they don't have something to support their learning needs, or if they aren't gifted to begin with, sometimes there's not a whole lot in there for that middle ground child. And for me, it's helped me to say to the parents when I'm meeting with them, I notice, and it's Mindprint that probably helped me notice, that if, even giving them a fidget toy during their PSSA exams, like just little tiny things that can make a big difference for those students who, struggle a little bit more with focus, where, they're competent academically, but somehow they're not on paper looking as competent. They have all these little, and it's all very clear language. If you have an attention problem, here are 3 things you can do to help with an attention problem or focus problem. So just help me, even though I've been doing this a very long time, it gave me more strategies, and with the confidence behind them that it's not just me seeing it, there's data to support it.
Anybody else want to chime in? Go ahead, Dawn.
I just wanted to say, and I won't be very long, but one thing that we do at our school, we implement what's called the school wellness wheel, and a part of that is that mastery-based learning. So this notion of this personalized competency-based education, but just really whittling it down to the individual learner. So all of our decisions are not, we don't make decisions just painting with a wide brush, and parents appreciate that, because I think as parents, just as educators, we all want what's best for our children, our babies, the people that are in front of us. And so it really does give us it extends an olive branch, and it gives us just a little bit more specific data to plan a targeted approach to ensure that we're delivering on our imperative.
Mm-hmm. No, I think Oprah said it best. We all, as humans, want to feel loved and to feel understood. And this is a component that makes us truly feel understood, right? And I know as a parent myself, having a lens that tells me this is what your kid's good at, especially for a student that struggles in school, is so encouraging, and to know how to channel those strengths, and just how these cognitive skills impact what a student looks like at home too, right? Like if they have a working memory deficit and you've given them 6 things to do and they're frustrated after 2 and you just think they're being ornery, then oh, it's because this kid needs a visual cue. They need a list written out that they can see, because you've given them 2 things and they're done. They don't know the other 4, right? And so that, this is a student that, or a child that wants to be, a good kid at home and wants to do well in school. So having those insights is a real connection, I think, for parents. So I think we've got a question here, and I had an idea that this would come because we've been talking about cognitive data, different kinds of cognitive data, how important it is, how it's driving change for student level, teacher level, administration level. But the question that's coming up in the audience is, well, what does this really look like? What is there an assessment? What are these strategies you keep referring to? How does that all work together? What does that look like for a teacher, for a student? And so the question is, how often should the Mindprint assessment be done? And so it's done once every 3 years. You could do it more often, especially in situations of trauma. But it's done every 3 years. And if you guys on the panel, could you just share a little bit about the assessments like? Because I'm sure the only lens we have is just these academic assessments we're always taking, right?
Well, is it 9 different tests? Do I have the number right? 9? I remember there was one that was just shapes, and you had to remember the order of the shapes and then try to pick what the next shape was, like patterning. I remember that one because it hurt my brain.
Yeah.
Trying to
And
think
it's
what else.
really-
I think I took it 2 years ago now.
Okay.
But I will say, I saw something in the chat. There is for Mindprint, and I know you guys could speak to it better than I do, but I had a few of my students that took it, and the data comes up. I forget what the word is, but they need to be retested because Mindprint figured out they really weren't engaged and they weren't really doing what they were supposed to be doing. Somehow it figures it out, and we retest those kids.
Yeah. It has I think it's like invalid, or it says something in maybe
Like
there's a little
that.
note about, yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, it's not like any other test that I've taken. And if you are a skilled test taker and you can go in and slay all the tests that you've ever taken, yeah, this one's it's gonna stop you in your tracks. And it's a great experience. It's just a different experience. And so don't get frustrated with it. That's what I'll say.
They're puzzles, right? Like it's
Yes.
more of when I say games, people automatically go to gamification, but it's really more puzzles that test the different skills.
Yeah.
And no
Vicky,
one
if you-
did a whole bunch of pre-work for me before I took the assessment, and I thought I clicked on the wrong link, and it was annoying and frustrating, and I was like, what is this? This is not, and then you can't go back and correct it. It was just a lot. It was I would say if you engage in mindfulness or just breathing, or like if you have that inner voice that talks to yourself and tells you to stay calm, use that while you're taking it. Because
Well, and the funny part is the hardest one for you is usually, your area of deficit, right?
Yep.
And that's why
Yep.
it's more
Exactly right.
challenging. But I think it's also important for the audience to know that this has been, this was developed by the University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine. It's been validated by tens of thousands of students in the educational realm. Outside of that, NASA uses it, and the government. So it's a valid assessment. Beyond the assessment are the evidence-based strategies, right? So what Mindprint has done so beautifully is it's not only giving you this data, but it's putting it in this nice package that says, here's a report for the student to look at. Here's a report if you want to take a more in-depth look at those strengths and any areas of deficit if there are. And then here's the match strategies for that student. And then at the teacher level, right, that's what Kelly was referring to, and Dawn too, the dashboard that says, okay, if you don't want to, personalize 30 different students, start by just grouping them in 2 different ways. When you're teaching a geometry lesson, take this approach, and teaching these students take this approach in these, just to create, at least a first step in that simple differentiation. Vicky, were you going to chime in and say something?
Yeah, just at the time when we were talking about the assessment, what students do appreciate is that they're not doing reading comprehension passages and also they're not solving long math problems. So it is more like puzzles, and there are 9 tasks, and each task is pretty different. And so it kind of holds their interest in the way where they know that even if one task is challenging for them, they're like, well, what's coming next? It'll be different. And we all learn differently, right? So some students are going to find some tasks hard and some tasks easy, and the other way around for the next task, let's say. So
Yeah, I don't want
ahead.
anybody to be frightened of the test
Yeah.
because I, like Don, it was offered during an in-service as one of my options, and I had no prior knowledge. It was right before Mindprint became known at Ridley. And I thought, geez, this test is terrible. But the kids, the format for them, I think it's more kid-friendly than is it adult-friendly, because kids embrace those puzzles online, whereas I'd rather have paper and pencil and do my work. They love that online format. And we do give them a little bit of pep talk before they take it. Look, this test might be challenging at times, but when you're done, you're going to see a list of your strengths. We always focus on, you're going to see a list of your strengths. We don't mention the negatives until we have to approach those, but they're always good at something on that test.
That's right.
Yeah. And I think that's the beauty of it, right? Regardless of academic performance, we all have strengths and areas that we can work on as adults, even. So there was one question in there that says, do you expect different results for like a 3rd grader versus a 9th grader, for example? And I think what we come back to, Vicky, is we always say, what do we say, that they're constant but malleable, or what's the line?
yeah, so cognitive skills are malleable but stable, and so that's also why you don't need to test every year the way you do for achievement testing, but we recommend every 3 years, kind of standard, because cognitive skills do grow, students mature, they have experiences that help them grow and strengthen these skills, but they're also pretty stable. You're not going to expect that working memory is going to change in over 6 months, and the goal is really, the strategy is the understanding of the student and the student's understanding of themselves, so that the right strategies can be used, so that the growth is in strategy use, and that grows then academic performance. So it's kind of it's growth with this cognitive data in self-confidence, academic achievement, and self-awareness. And then, yes, like every 3 years, we do recommend, because a 3rd grader isn't going to be the same as when they're in 6th grade and then in 9th grade, let's say.
Yeah. All right. I think we've gone through all of the questions. I just want to say thank you. Crystal, did you want to say one thing?
Yeah, I think there was one more question.
Was there? Okay.
It's in the chat,
Okay.
but it asked about, let me get back to it. The varied results can be based on student engagement while taking the test. Is there any research on whether or not the results from the Mindprint assessment align with the cognitive test provided by a school psychologist?
So Vicky, I'll let you answer that
So
question.
we do have, there have been studies that align it closely with the WISC and the WAYS, and a lot of students who have the psychological neuropsychs or psychoeds, you can see that alignment on a personal level as well. So, but yeah, we have some studies that show that. So we can, I don't know, Kat, if you have the link to the research on our website, or I can find it on my other screen. We can put it in the chat.
And we can include that in the email follow-up for you all too. But if you go to our website, we have a research page that has, journal articles that have been published and white papers and such. And if you have, need a more detailed question on that, I'm sure Vicky, her email was shared earlier in the chat, but I can send that in the email as well as in the follow-up. One thing that we didn't mention is that we do have combined reporting. So if you're an NWEA MAP educator, we can combine the Mindprint with that achievement data, and we can do it with any achievement data. So state tests, things like that. So I know some high schools use the SAT as sort of their end of study test. And so we have an alignment with that as well, where we can predict whether a student should take the SAT or the ACT, and which subtests would be best to spend time on studying versus they're good in this area. Don't waste your time on that, working on this. So there's a lot of different opportunities in how we can use this data and how we can leverage student strengths. In addition to the Boost course that I think Vicki mentioned for middle school and high school, where, it's really just a study skills course that builds self-awareness and ownership, that student agency that we're wanting to develop our students to have. So thank you so much to our panelists. I so appreciate your time. I know you're pulled in 100 different directions, and I know I can speak for the audience. Well, I'll speak to the audience because you're educators too, but thank you. Thank you for the beautiful work that you do to enhance students' lives each and every day. And we hope that we're just a piece of that puzzle that just makes your life a little bit easier and enhances the growth of each and every student, which they deserve. So thank you so much. And hopefully you'll stay tuned, subscribe to Mindprint to learn more about our webinar opportunities and any other communication, and we'll be following up with you today. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks. Bye, guys.
Yeah.